A desired muscular physiological adaptation that I would like to discuss is hypertrophy. Muscle hypertrophy specifically refers to the increase in the size of the muscle. Acute variables for hypertrophy include training volume, the intensity, rest intervals, exercise selection, tempo, all these different variables that come into play to determine how much or how little hypertrophy will actually occur. In regard to training volume, it's best to do 3 to 5 sets, 6 to 12 repetitions per set. For intensity, it's about 60 to 75% of a 1 repetition max. So it's not giving 100% effort, but it's also not as low as muscle endurance that would use a lower intensity percentage. Rest intervals, 30 to 90 seconds for metabolic stress or 2 to 3 minutes for heavier lifts. So it really depends, but you should never be resting longer than 2 to 3 minutes maximum when you're doing hypertrophy training. Tempo just refers to the pace of the movement, but for hypertrophy, it's best to do a controlled tempo, like a 2 count descent and then a little 0 second pause right back up into a 2 count ascent. So it's concentrically and eccentrically, you would try to match the tempos towards each other. Frequency refers to how often you should train each muscle group. For hypertrophy, it's best to train a muscle group 2 to 3 times per week. So if people say that, their calves never grow or certain muscles never grow, the chances are that they might not be training that muscle group enough or frequently enough each week. Progressive overload is really just another term for gradually increasing weight over time. So instead of going from like all these different random exercises, a progressive overload approach would be more, okay, week 1, bench press, we're going to do 65 pounds. Okay, week 2, bench press, we're going to do 65 or 70 pounds. Week 3, we're going to try 72 or 75 pounds, and it's progressively increasing over time. The variation of exercises is important for diversifying, angles, grips, different exercise modalities, things like that. So the more variation in exercise programming, chances are the better hypertrophy you might be able to have because of that. In terms of nutrition, for muscle hypertrophy to really come into play, you need adequate protein intake because you're breaking down the muscle. We need protein to help build that muscle back up. Lastly, recovery is important. Sufficient rest and recovery and sleep are all necessary to help the body rebuild itself. Moving on to exercises for hypertrophy. Really, it could be anything if done correctly and properly with the right amount of sets and reps and frequency and tempo. But more specifically, 5 exercises I would choose would be barbell squats. It could be a front squat. It could be a back squat. Bench presses, different variations of bench press. There's multiple different grips you can choose from. Pull-ups or chin-ups, because not everybody can do pull-ups. Chin-ups are a little bit easier for them. Deadlifts would be another great compound movement and something that I would definitely recommend for overall hypertrophy, but mainly like posterior hypertrophy. And dumbbell bicep curls, I feel like that's an easy suggestion to give someone. It's easier to actually see progression with that. So I would probably include that in my list of top 5 exercises for hypertrophy. It's important to remember that individual factors and genetics play a big role in hypertrophy and the ability to grow a muscle. So just because I say to do something, someone else says to do something, research says to do something, sometimes we just have to tweak the programming a little bit to really tap into what is best for our own genetics. Wrapping up here, I want to just make a reference to a 2019 study by Hahn et al., where the researchers investigated the effects of high volume resistance training on muscle hypertrophy fibers in trained young men. Over a 6-week period, the trained young men underwent high volume resistance training protocols, and the results of the study showed that muscle fiber hypertrophy was actually due to sarcoplasmic hypertrophy rather than an increase in the actual contractile proteins in the muscle fibers.